in a mysterious, perhaps very subliminal way. Just take a moment to sense your own rhythm, and perhaps this is an imagination, but maybe it can actually happen that we sync up for a moment our pulses with one another. So from this place, I invite you in perhaps to keep your eyes closed. If you wish, I'm going to read you the text that I brought. They're selections, short selections from different strata of Hebrew sacred literature, starting with the Torah, which goes back, we don't know exactly how far, but perhaps 3,000 years, perhaps 2,500 years when it was collected. And then moving into a rabbinic text and then a Hasidic text. And I'll give you the timings on those when I read them. And I'm going to read the first two in the Hebrew and the English with slightly different translation than what I sent out to you. So from the Torah, Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmotenu v'yirdu vidgat hayam uva'of hashamayim uva'behema uva'chol haaretz uva'chol haromes al haaretz. Vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo B'tselem Elohim bara oto, zachar u'nekeva bara otam. And God, source power, said, "Let us create an earth being in our likeness, according to our image, and let them be stewards over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens, and all the beasts, and all the land, and all the insects that creep on the land." So God created the earth being in its image. In the image of God, God created it. Male and female, God created them. Take a breath and take that into your whole body, mind, spirit, self for a breath. And exhale it out. We'll move on to the second text, which is just from a little bit after the first text in the Torah. There are two different stories of the creation of human beings, and this is the second from the second story. Vayitzer Yud-He Vav-He Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama vayipak be'apav nishmat chayim vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. And Yud-He Vav-He, God's source power, formed the earth being of dust from the earth, and God blew into its nostrils the sole breath of life, and the earth being became a living being. The third text, I'm just going to read it in English for sake of time, is a prayer that was created by rabbinic sages. We don't know exactly when, but it was incorporated into the morning prayer service, probably sometime between the 7th and 9th centuries of the Common Era. So it's found in the Talmud, which is a huge compendium of Torah commentary. And here's the prayer. It's part of the liturgy every observant Jew would say every morning. A fountain of blessings are you, Yud-He Vav-He, our power, sovereign of all time and space, who formed the human being with wisdom and created in her many tiny openings, ducts, and vessels. Revealed and known it is before your honored throne that if one of them is open, that should be closed, or one of them is closed, that should be open, then it would be impossible to endure and to stand before you. A fountain of blessings are you, Yud-He Vav-He, who heals all flesh and does wonders. And finally, from the last layer here, two short teachings from the Baal Shem Tov, who was a sage, a teacher who lived in 18th century Poland, and he was a renewalist, a revivalist, who brought a new path. He made a new bridge, in the words that Charles used about what our teacher Jesus was doing. He also, the Baal Shem Tov, was attempting to make a bridge between earth and heaven, between the people of his time who had become very dispirited and depressed, and the divine that they had lost touch with in some way. The Baal Shem Tov revealed divinity here on earth, within earthly human beings, whose very organs and faculties are garments that cloak the divine power. The Baal Shem Tov taught, there is an element of the highest love in all your worldly pleasures, and through your natural desires for such delights, it becomes easy for you to come to the love of God. If this were not true, how difficult it would be for you to even begin to love God. But because you are able to arouse such love through physical pleasures, it becomes easy to love God. Meditate on this. And yes, it is true. Your love for physical pleasures is a fallen love, and yet it does derive from the highest love. So there you have what I brought.
Well, there's a lot to contemplate in everything that you just read. I see so many places where we could have questions and ponder a deeper meaning. I guess if we start with the very first one question that I would ask you is, what does this text mean to you? You picked it out as the very first one to read. Does it have special meaning for you, and what would you say brought you to this particular text?
Well, these early, this is the very beginning of the Torah. There's such deep mystery here about who we are, how we came to be, what our purpose is. And in a very, very few words, there's an essence. The Hebrew word is ikar, an essence of what human beings are doing here on this planet. And reams and reams of commentary have been written and given about these few words. But I just want to point out in this first text, in the second text, it gives a little bit different take on the creation of human beings. But I'm struck by several things in this first text. So it says, "Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu," that the divine creative force has the seed of idea, thought, desire, yearning to create a being that is in the image of the Creator and the likeness. It has two words, in our image and in our likeness. What does that mean? One of my teachers, Rabbi Rami Shapiro, talks about the image being that our very form is a manifestation of divinity. Likeness is how we use that form, how we live in that form, what we bring. Can we bring the vision, the broad vision, the intentionality, the compassion of the largest mind to our lives and to the way that we connect with other beings, with other aspects of life and of our planet itself. So then it says, and what is our mandate? Let them be stewards over the fish of the sea. It's often translated, and I gave you a more traditional translation, let them dominate, because the word in Hebrew has a sense of to cause to go down, to be lower than. But there's a sense also, and this comes out more in the second story, that our job here is to, with our consciousness, to be stewards, to care for, to hold a vision of connectedness. So that's all there for me. That's a bit of what's there for me in that first text.
I thought it was interesting, and I don't know if this is even important, but it kind of stood out for me that it says, let us create an earth being in our likeness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking if God is, it felt confusing to me to think about let us and in our likeness, because that indicates plural. So I wasn't sure how that lines up with one supreme being. And then I noticed that down lower when it says, so God created the earth being in its image. So then that's another way of talking about it. What does it mean? And then in the verse below, it doesn't mention in the image at all. It talks about coming from dust. So I see some discrepancies between those two things about is God one supreme being? Does us and our refer to a masculine and feminine principle, or what would you say about those differences, or am I reading something into it?
Well, if you are reading something into it, then you're standing in a long and venerable tradition of rabbinic sages and commentators who have spent thousands of years debating and thinking about and filling in the spaces in the very questions and others that you're bringing. Part of this is my translation, because Hebrew is a gendered language, but it was very clear to the sages that God is neither female nor male. God has no gender, but Hebrew has to have a gender. So it's usually translated, God created the earth being in his image. And my translations, I'm attempting to get closer to the mystery that's braided into this entire passage of how can we talk about something that's ineffable. Your first question about the plural, Naaseh Adam B'Tsalmenu, there's lots of stories trying to understand what that might mean. In fact, there are two names for God in this first stories of creation. Yud He Vav He, which is 4 letters in Hebrew that were never to be pronounced. They refer to the ineffable, but oftentimes they're pronounced by a stand-in word, Adonai, which means my Lord. But Yud He Vav He, as some of our wonderful teachers have pointed out, is basically a word, a non-word that's made up of only vowels. So if you were to try to pronounce it, which we weren't supposed to, it kind of sounds like this. Like breath.
Uh-huh.
The other word, Elohim, El was an ancient Canaanite god, so we have to remember that Judaism was built upon the Canaanite goddess religions and gods and goddesses, just the way Christianity grew out of Judaism. And so El, Elohim, which is translated often as God. El was like the creative force in the Canaanite pantheon. Elohim is plural. It literally is translated as gods. So yeah, your question is a good one. What does this mean? And then it says, we will, let us create. So some of the midrash, the stories talk about, well, God was consulting with the angels on this one. And some of them say, well, the angels really didn't want God to create this being. So this is some of the stories that have come out. But what I say in my reading of all this stuff is, they're trying to get us to blow our minds, basically. Stop thinking. Stop trying to figure it out. Stop trying to make it make sense. It does not make sense. So open yourself to a possibility of a kind of broad consciousness that could include all kinds of contradictions, multiple stories about the same truth, touching different parts of it. And the second story, for me, then, is very powerful because it talks about human beings as being a mixture of earth and spirit, of dust and breath. Yeah.
Thank you. And, I'm noticing time-wise, this is great stuff, and we could go on for an hour and a half just on this part. But since it's a circle and we need to allow time for each person to speak, I'm going to ask the two of you maybe in the next 4 minutes or so to sort of wrap up this part of the circle. Also, I see that someone, is that Raghav? Is that you? I see Adele. Who is that? I've unmuted you.
Italia.
Yeah, welcome. Glad you can join us. Glad you can join us. Thank you. Okay, so so for the next 4 minutes or so, I'll turn it back over to the two of you.
Well, I think, Diane, you should wrap up for us. But basically, before doing that, I just wanted to say, in a brief conversation we had the other day, I told you how much I appreciated this approach to studying what is really important in life, because I did not grow up Jewish. I grew up in a Presbyterian household. And what I learned through, going to a women's Presbyterian college and everything, is you really didn't question the text. It's like things were laid out, and this is the way it is, and people who began to question were often threatened with hell and damnation or being expelled by the group, or, you just are not a non-believer, you don't question, or you're out of the faith. So to me, this is really, really important and powerful. And so we make fun of the Jews for all the jokes about it takes two Jews to solve three people's problems or something. And there are all those jokes about how Jews argue with each other. So I think this is really key to survival, to be able to question what was relevant then and what is relevant now. So that would be my take on what I would add.
Yeah, thank you so much, Libby. I have so appreciated that in our dialogue so far, and that in addition to the content of the texts I bring, I'm also bringing this underlying process, which is so much a part of our Jewish tradition, which is that our sacred text has always been a sounding board and a stimulus to dialogue. We come into dialogue with the text. And that process of dialoguing with the text is what has kind of kept us alive and growing edge. And as times change, as needs change, there's a permission, there's a mandate to have this very living, lively dialogue with the text. So I'll just read you this little last conclusion in the notes that I was making in terms of the content of what I brought. I mean, we're talking about both process and content. But can I accept the gift of incarnation, this blessing of embodiment that allows for relationship with other aspects of God, God clothed in this world as other beings, trees, rocks, animals, birds, building, airplanes, flowers, as someone once said, the world as God in drag? Can I perceive my embodiment as the partaking of the privilege of participating in the great project of God perceiving God's self? So the question that I would invite us to consider today, or the questions, two, basically. One, and either one, what does it mean to you to be formed in God's image? If that's at all within the lexicon of how you think about yourself. Or another way of thinking about this, do you connect to divinity? Do you connect to divinity through your body? And if so, how?